Bar chart that I showed you there, that represents the percentage of 3rd to 8th grade students in Braintree classified as meeting or exceeding expectations on the English Language Arts MCAS. As you can see in the visual I provided you, Braintree students are still demonstrating skills at a significantly lower level than pre-pandemic, with only 52% of students classified as meeting or exceeding. That's your proficiency benchmark. In the spring of 2023. This stands in stark contrast to the statement made at the November 6th strategic planning meeting that, quote, 75% of Braintree students are proficient at reading. The statement is simply unsupported by your publicly available data. Never in the history of the next generation MCAS have Braintree's 3rd through 8th grade students been close to 75% of them meeting or exceeding expectations. The highest percentage recorded was 66% of those students that were tested in 2019. Secondly, I'd like to draw your attention to the data table extracted from Braintree's spring accountability profile. As of the spring of 2023, in Braintree for grades 3 through 8 English Language Arts, the only subgroup classified as meeting its target for learning loss recovery was Asian students. All other subgroups were classified as either improved but below target, no change, or declining. Low-income students, students with disabilities, and African-American student subgroups were all classified as having declined in their recovery path. These same students demonstrated significantly more progress in their mathematics skills. These facts strongly suggest that the English Language Arts programming and curriculum for 3rd through 8th grade students is not meeting the needs in the way that your mathematics programming is. Third, I'd like to draw your attention to some of the most striking results. In the spring of 2023, only 43% of 6th grade students in Braintree met or exceeded expectations on their grade 6 ELA MCAS. Only 30% of low-income 6th grade students met or exceeded expectation. That means 70% of Braintree's low-income 6th grade students did not meet proficiency expectations. For 7th grade students, 71% of low-income students did not meet proficiency expectations in English Language Arts. Fourth, I'd like to draw your attention to the ED reports. It's a nonprofit independent resource for evaluation of curriculum quality. You could think of that somewhat like a Consumer Reports for curriculum. It gave the Lucy Culkin's 2019 units of study a failing rating. It is listed as failing to address and missing 88 of 112 foundational skills for students. It is listed as only addressing 3 of 30 required reading comprehension skills in grade 5. Per their overview, quote, while the materials include high quality anchor texts, most are not appropriate complex for the grade level, and the associated tasks and teacher supports may not adequately ensure students meet grade level expectations in reading. The volume of variance of choice in the program may not support all readers in achieving grade level expectation and/or a full year's growth in reading. Fifth, I'd like to point out Education Commissioner Jeffrey Riley was recently quoted in the Boston Globe saying, quote, the state's ability to change districts' ways is limited by Massachusetts's legal structure, which prioritizes local decision-making. Unable to mandate curriculum, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education has instead tried to incentivize change, offering millions of dollars in grant funding for districts to purchase new materials. I put a link to the DESE grants page. Lastly, according to the Brookline School Committee member, Stephen Ehrenberg, school boards everywhere need to be screaming about this. Literacy instruction that's not aligned with evidence does such trauma and hard to mitigate damage to kids. Lastly, Assistant Superintendent Brett Conway from the Pentucket Regional School District was quoted in the Boston Globe. They oversaw a literacy curriculum overhaul from 2017 through 2023. And this is a relatively privileged school district, perhaps comparable on that level to Braintree. And it led to significant improvements in their test scores in English Language Arts. And he said, quote, Merely adding phonics lessons to balanced literacy materials isn't good enough. This was the strategy I watched presented in November. The only party that benefits from spending public dollars in something that's rated as harmful or not effective with kids is the publishing company that sells them those materials, not the community members, not the educators. Of course, there's more to a child than their test scores. Of course, there's more to a classroom than the books in front of the kids. That doesn't mean we should be spending tax money on something that has a failing rating, especially when our data says our kids need help. Thank you very, very much for your time.
Thank you. Okay, moving right into our agenda for routine matters. Approval of open session minutes from January 8th, 2024. Do I have a motion?
Motion.
I have a motion by Dr. Horak,
Second.
second by Ms. Tuffy. All those in favor?
Aye.
Excuse me. Any opposed? That is unanimous. Communications and accommodations. Mr. Lee.
Thank you very much. I only have a couple this evening. The first is just to recognize the Braintree Rotary again. Every single year, you may know that they deliver dictionaries to all our grade 3 students and thesauruses to our grade 5 students, which they again did this year. So they went to every single school and presented those books to our students, and we are extremely grateful for their generosity. The other is just to recognize somebody who was just recognized in the event itself, and that is our longstanding art director, Heidi Hurley, who was recently recognized by the community as the Martin Luther King Jr. Citizen of the Year Award. The ceremony was outstanding, and whoever was involved in picking her did an outstanding job. She could not find a better person. And then lastly, I turn it over to Ms. Renazar about some opportunities we have coming up this vacation time.
We were awarded a Acceleration Academy grant through DESE. We got $200,000, which is an amazing amount of money, led by Courtney Miller, Director of Math. And we have sent out invitations for 36 students in grades 3, 4, and 5, and 24 students in grades 6 through 10. Those invitations are for students that are below grade level or have some needed supports around their benchmarks. And so this is intentional intervention work. It's an awesome opportunity. We're thrilled to have the funding and to finally be doing some of the interventions that we've been hoping to do. So if you know of anyone that got the invitation, please make sure that they return them because they are coming in slowly. But the more students we have, the better.
Who wants to go skiing? So done.
Math. Who wants to do math?
Math is better.
Mhm.
Let's go math.
Great. I was out of town, as some of you know, so I was unable to attend Heidi's ceremony, but as just to echo what Mr. Lee said, that well deserved. I was able to watch it on BCAM, so if anyone was not able to attend, watch it on BCAM. It was a wonderful ceremony, and again, congratulations to Heidi. I did reach out to her personally to congratulate her. And the grant, very exciting. Are there any other comments or questions from the committee on the communications? Seeing none. We'll move on to gifts to schools. Again, I will read all the gifts and I will ask for one motion in 1 second. Bay State Textiles, 3 checks totaling $188.10. Braintree High School gifts to schools totaling $800. 1 check in the amount of $300 from the Huang family to the BHS PTO in support of the teachers as a holiday gift. 1 check in the amount of $500 from Global Partners ExxonMobil Educational Alliance Program. East Middle School gifts to schools totaling $8,001.51. 1 check in the amount of $995 from East Middle School collected from the Cougar Palooza fundraiser for $955, the yearbook for $30, and student council for $10. And 1 check in the amount of $7,006.51 from East Middle School collected from the Cougar Palooza fundraiser, $115. Life Touch Photos, $3,907.71. Student Council, $18.80, yearbook, $40, grade 6 field trips, $200, and grade 7 field trip, $2,725. Do I have a motion to accept all gifts?
Motion to accept.
I have a motion by Dr. Horak,
Second.
second by Ms. Tuffy. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That is unanimous. Moving on from the superintendent. Mr. Lee.
This evening, as was introduced earlier. We're going to go through some of our standardized test reports and this from 2023. So I'm going to turn this again over to Assistant Superintendent Nora Venazza to introduce it.
So we have Anthony Garofalo, Director of Guidance, Mary Ellen Gennaro, Director of English and Reading, Courtney Miller, Director of Math. You guys can come up, and Betsy Clifford, Director of Science. They have put together a deeper dive into the initial data that we showed in September. It was the preliminary data, but we said we were going to come back to it and dive into it more. Of course, we have dove into it even farther than is up here, but we wanted to give you as much information as possible as we get through the year. So if you guys want to go ahead.
Great. All right, so this is just an overview of what you guys will see as we go through the other slides. So we did MCAS comparisons to state results. We looked at a combined grades 3 through 8 because we'd probably be here till midnight if we broke everything down. And then we looked at the high school data separately. And so we are doing comparison between 2023 and 2022 in ELA, math, and the science tests. And then we'll also have SAT comparisons, state and national results, and then AP multi-year trends and achievement. And then just to kind of review a little bit of where we've been, because a lot of these tests build over years. So looking at where the students have been prior to taking the exam is really helpful. So as a reminder, in 2019, 2020, we had the closure with the pandemic and there was no MCAS test. And then the following year, 2020, 2021, we had hybrid schedules. Some students were fully remote for the whole year. And a lot of our, not a lot, but some of our courses had to be modified to be able to fit in that hybrid schedule. And then students were testing remotely at home at times or in school, and not everybody tested. And it was kind of honestly a messy year for data. And then we returned to typical schedule, full administration of MCAS in the spring of 22, and then last year as well in 2023. So awesome. So again, for MCAS, we'll have the 3 through 8 and then the high school, English, math, and science. And then the score range, they're all now in that next gen score range model. So it makes it a little easier to look at data since everybody's doing the same thing now with the same rating. So again, now we all have not meeting expectations up through exceeding expectations. So this is science to start. For science, just in case some may not know, students test in 5th grade for science. That 5th grade test really goes over everything in the curriculum from grades 3, 4, and 5. And so it was easier to show the data this way than looking at trends a little bit. So this just shows our 22 and 23 data. The results are relatively similar, and we are above the state, continue to be above the state, as you'll notice. One thing to note is that these students testing in 2023 as 5th graders would have been in that hybrid schedule their 3rd grade year, which was a challenge with curriculum for sure. You know, and there's so many demands for literacy and math, certainly in 3rd grade, you know, that sometimes we are kind of prioritizing them a little bit with time. So something to keep in mind as we look at some of those results. And then 8th grade, again, we continue to be above the state. You might have noticed that the 8th grade numbers in general are lower. That's been a constant trend in the state for some reason. This is, I would consider, one of the hardest tests as far as looking at scores statewide for MCAS for any grade level. And I, you know, not that my opinion matters necessarily with that, but I think it's because of the elevated rigor in middle school, and we're still testing 3 grade levels of content. So that's a lot for the students to try to put together when they're testing at the end of 8th grade. So, but again, we are still above the state. And success rates in general, you know, continue. These students testing in our 8th graders in 2023 would have been hybrid in their 6th grade year. And with that also, we were still being very restrictive about hands-on activities and sharing materials, which really impacted the science activities. Our middle school program and our elementary school program are very hands-on, you know, which was a challenge for us during the pandemic. And then the 4th and 5th grade also had interrupted because of the pandemic. which would have or could have impacted this 8th grade scores as well. And then high school biology, these numbers are really high, which is great. Students are doing well. We're above the state. Again, these students would have had interrupted schooling as far as curriculum for 5th, 6th, and 7th grade. And a lot of those units and going through the curriculum, the life science is often at the end of the year. So sometimes that got cut short a little bit. So considering all of that, especially these numbers, I think are really great. So we are continuing to work on our tutoring program for students who have not passed at the high school. Students gets extra support during study halls. Most of the students, honestly, in that program who we're working with who haven't passed yet in the upper grades are typically transfer students coming in. We do have, a few students each year who have been here, but many of them are transfer students coming internationally or just, from private schools or other schools in the state. Do we want to keep going through the subjects?
Great. Anybody have questions specifically? Are we okay with going through? Yeah, we'll continue. Thank you.
All right, so transitioning to math. So unlike science, in math, we are giving an end of year assessment in grades 3 through 8, and then we skip over 9th grade and give the assessment again in 10th grade for MCAS. So again, unlike science, we really are looking at end of grade level standards when we're testing that. So a 4th grade exam is not going back to 3rd grade standards, et cetera. It's really just the end of grade level standards here. So what you're looking at on the screen is again, a comparison from 2022 up to 2023. One thing that I want to call out is 3 through 8 is a very large span, but I think overall we are looking at a positive trend here. The number I specifically wanted to highlight for us was that our exceeding expectations went from 7% back in 2022 up to 10% in 2023. So that is certainly a movement that we'd like to see. If we're focusing specifically on district versus state, again, like Dr. Clifford had mentioned for science, we are once again above the state in the categories where we want to be above them and below them in the categories where we want to be below. So specifically looking at our exceeding and meeting expectations, those are higher in our district than they are in the state. And then for partially meeting, which is your orange, or not meeting expectations in red, we're below the state, which is again the trend that we would want to look at. While you don't have it on the screen here, I did specifically want to mention and celebrate that our 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade data saw increased trends and increased percentages in both the exceeding and meeting categories, and decreased in that partially meeting and not meeting expectations overall in all 3 of those grade levels. And again, like Dr. Clifford was mentioning, just trying to think about the journey of our students and where they were back in 2019 versus today, thinking about those elementary students, we're sort of cycling out from the school closures, the hybrid experience, and really that lost time on learning. Looking at our middle schools, we are either stagnant or still trying to catch up to pre-pandemic numbers for sure. But again, overall in grades 3 through 8, we have a story here. Thank you. In grade 10, again, we're comparing 2022 to 2023, and we have a very good news story to look at overall. If I'm focusing again on exceeding expectations, we rose from 14% to 17%, which is a trend we want to see. We also rose from 46% in the meeting category up to 54%. And then in that partially meeting category, we went down from 36% only partially meeting in 2022 to 24% partially meeting in 2023. One thing that I know was mentioned earlier was the grant. We are very excited about the Math Acceleration Grant that we received. DESE was specifically targeting math for the February and April break acceleration academies. Acceleration is actually a word that we've heard a couple of times since the pandemic. So rather than talking about lost learning, if we think about it in terms of lost time on learning, acceleration is a better way to think about it than remediation, right? So we're trying to get students caught back up as quickly as we can, knowing that they simply didn't have the time to learn the same amount of information that we did pre-pandemic. And knowing that students coming to the table are more mature, are more ready to tackle concepts and attach them to something that they already know, means that we can accelerate through some of those standards more quickly than we would have if we were teaching them during the grade level that they're normally taught. So during the Math Acceleration Camp, again, it's going to be acceleration of student learning. It's not to be thought of as remediation and going back to something that you never understood, but instead really tackling those prerequisite skills that'll allow students to be successful on their grade level standards. In addition to the acceleration academies, we also still have our MCAS prep programs happening at all 3 levels. So at the elementary level, they're typically before school, sometimes after school. At the middle school level, we typically run them after school. And then at the high school level, which is our year for competency determination, it is mandatory to pass that grade 10 math MCAS exam for a high school diploma. We have the MCAS tutor who is there during the school day, either pulling small groups with students coming out of their study halls or potentially pushing into sections of math courses where we do have a number of students who need that extra support prior to the exam. So we do that MCAS prep 2 different times during the school year, one leading up to the November retest, which obviously already happened. And then we have our tutor coming back for semester 2 who will prepare students for the March retest, but then also be working with current 10th grade students who will take that exam for the first time in May.
Are there similar supports for science?
Yeah, so at the high school there is. So we have a very similar tutoring program that goes on. So we've been focusing our, for science, they have a retest option. They can now, this is the first year they can take physics or biology in February. It used to historically only be biology. So we have, most of our students are testing in biology just because typically that's what they've had before, especially those transferring in. So our tutor has been focused on students who are above 9th grade and who haven't passed yet. And then when she returns for our session leading up to our June MCAS, we'll continue any upperclassmen support, but really we'll be focusing on anybody who's currently in 9th grade, maybe struggling a little bit in class and might need some of that extra support prior to taking the test. So to really work on those numbers.
Are there any other questions or comments from the committee?
I had a question,
Mr. Fogarty.
I was wondering if you could give a number or percentage or rough number of students who are getting the extra MCAS prep courses or tutoring.
That's a great question. Really depends, at least from a math standpoint, depends on the level, elementary versus middle versus high school that we're talking about. Specifically at the high school level, leading up to the November retest, we had about, and Anthony might be able to, maybe Andy would be better. I'm trying to think of the number of retests that we gave. We had anywhere from 10 to 15 students getting that tutoring, leading into the May portion. So with our tutoring that's going to start back up in second semester, we'll have about 30 students who are accessing that tutoring. Again, a little bit different. One thing that we tried new last school year, and we're hoping to do it again, second semester starts in a week, is having the tutor push into specific sections of some of our 10th grade math courses to have a bigger impact on students. So that number would be skewed a little bit. But in terms of the pullout setting and either in one-on-one tutoring or small group anywhere from 4 to 6 students, we have who receive that tutoring at the high school. The elementary and middle schools have taken different approaches over the past couple of years. At the middle school level, we've tried targeted invitations to students. The challenge with it being after school is, of course, there's a lot of factors in terms of whether or not a student is able to stay after school. But we've also had open sessions. So we've also tried formatting it in terms of when you think of math, there are many domains. There's geometry, there's algebra, there's measurement and data, et cetera. So we've done review sessions after school for anybody who wants to join and specifically dive into some extra practice questions there.
Any other? Ms. Duffy?
So I have a question about the Acceleration Academy, which sounds really great, and congratulations on getting the grant. My concern is that it's during vacation, and that is just as it's difficult to get kids to come after school. I think I'm worried that you may have trouble getting students motivated to come during vacation.
Mm-hmm.
One of the reasons we set up the Math Connections classes years ago was that the remediation would happen during school time, and similar to what you're doing with your high school tutor. So what kind of a response do you have, and have you hired teachers for those programs?
Yes, thank you for the questions. We have hired teachers for the programs, and we were a little concerned about that as well, because February and April break are very, times when we all need to relax, which I understand, but we have fully staffed the program. The grant in particular mandated that it be during February and April vacation. It's interesting, DESE has done a number of acceleration grants over the past couple of years. One that you're probably familiar with is the early literacy acceleration week that has happened in Braintree for the past couple of years for K-2 the week before school. So every time the Acceleration Academy grants come out, they have different stipulations. We've seen some that are allowing after school hours or weekend hours, but they really are additional hours outside of the typical school day. So to answer your question, we have hired staff. We have sent out the first round of invitations, with the second round going out either tonight or tomorrow from our program coordinators. We have heard back from about 50% of the families that we've contacted, whether yes or no, but we certainly still have some seats to fill.
Okay, thank you.
Are they expected to come to one or the other or both?
So right now, we are only inviting for the February vacation. The way that we wrote the grant is that any student who successfully completes the February vacation program, meaning attending all 4 days, would be invited to come to April and would have first seat if they want to come back in April as well. But after we get the yeses from the February grant successful completion students, then we'll send out another round of invitations for different students in April.
And how is it structured? You said it's 4 days?
So it's 4 days, Tuesday through Friday, from 8 a.m. to 1:30 p.m., 30-minute lunch in between. And one of the stipulations of the grant is that they complete a certain number of hours on math learning. So we are doing 5 hours of math a day. Again, a celebration of math, right? So we are doing hands-on activities. We really want, one nice thing is that we don't have the time pressure that we do normally in a 44-minute middle school class or a 58-minute high school class or a 60-minute elementary class, right? So those activities can go as long as they would like. The grant is also mandating that the classes be between 10 and 12 students only. So it's a very low ratio of teacher to student, which means you can really do a lot of work with students individually.
And when is the deadline, or do you have a deadline for the students to respond, or the parents to respond?
So our initial deadline was Sunday, but we would love to still hear from any families that received invitations last week. So we're sort of in the calling phase at this point.
You're reaching out.
Exactly. So we started with Parent Square, and then we also used email addresses that were in our Aspen system, and now we're picking up the phone. And again, we'll just continue that until we reach February vacation.
Great. Any other questions on science or math? Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Good evening. So for English, I was just here not all that long ago. And so for the new members, if you would like to have a copy of the full presentation that was done in November, I'm happy to just send that along to you. So tonight would be a review for folks that were here before, as the test scores were presented then and haven't changed. So for ELA, for 3 to 8, and keeping in line with the way in which we're breaking down the scores tonight, I also want to just sort of touch on where that 3 to 8 breakdown changes a little bit for us. The scores are beginning to make some rebounds from the pandemic, particularly with strong performance for grades 3 to 5. As we look at the questions, as we went down and did some analysis with that, the breakdown for the standards showing for reading comprehension were strong across the grades, particularly in transferable skills for comprehension, in math and making meaning out of word problems, as well as in science, where students performed well in all 3 of the grades that they were tested in their ability to describe in writing what they had read and what they were able to analyze. So that transference of skills is really particularly helpful. as it's what we do with reading. In our jobs, we need to read information and be able to transfer it. In grade 6, 7, and 8, particularly grade 6, not news to most of the folks in the room tonight, there has been traditionally a dip in grade 6 over the last few years. And that is a statewide dip across the Commonwealth. I think particularly of importance is what we're doing to address that, and being very strategic in the way in which we're looking at the standards where students are not necessarily having the level of success that we want them to have, the methods of instruction that we're using to target those particular literacy conventions that students may struggle with when they get to a more complex understanding of a text. We also are really happy this year to be able to add another layer of data. Our 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students had just completed the initial benchmark STAR testing. So that adds this layer to teachers for their understanding of where each individual student is, where students are performing as a class and at grade level. And also it gives us an opportunity to understand maybe some support materials specifically that would go with grouping those students for interventions. So I'm very excited and looking forward to unpacking that first round of data. I think that will go a long way for us being able to really understand where our middle school students are. For the high school level, our grade 10 scores show a steady, slow but steady increase over last year, 9% increase in the exceeding and meeting. I think as Courtney mentioned and as Betsy mentioned earlier, one of the things that we're still struggling with, and it's not the sole issue, but it's certainly the pandemic. We'd love to see a rapid rebound in the scores, but when we consider the fact that we had a year that lost a few months initially, that we had a year that was a hybrid year with some lost time on learning, that the year following that had a year of 10-day protocols for anyone testing positive, students and teachers, and that we now remain at 5 days. That has an impact. And so as much as we would love to look at the scores and say, hey, we're right back to 2019 and we're right there, we're not right there. We're making our way in a manner that is steady and positive, however. And I think one of the indicators, and I don't want to steal Anthony's thunder, but certainly, as we mentioned in November, one of the other ways that we kind of can look at how students are doing with writing, literacy, and communication is through the SAT scores, which have remained steady and high 500s. And AP Lit and AP Lang are also very stellar opportunities for students. So I also wanted to just address, I know you had asked a question, Mr. Fogarty, about the participation for students. I can tell you that we do have tutoring for students second semester for both students who need to participate in the retesting of MCAS and also for students at the 10th grade level who've been flagged by teachers as students who might need extra support. I'm really happy to report to you that of the students that took the test in November as a retake, they all passed. Wonderful. We have only 2 students who to the district after the test was given in November, and they do need to take it in the retest, but that's 2 students who appear to be strong. So we're really happy with that information. And as to our 10th grade students that are receiving the extra tutoring, we're talking about 14, I think as of yesterday, it was about 14 students who teachers had flagged and said, we'd really love to have some extra supports wrapped around these students. That's provided during study hall times. They have a tutor right here on the campus to be able to work with them.
Can we go back to the previous line, the 3 to 8? Oh, between 22 and 23, correct me if I'm wrong, it's pretty static. Like the expectations, the percentages are pretty much,
1 or 2% increase.
I'm sorry,
It's a 1 or 2% increase.
small.
Yeah,
And you said that the sixth graders especially,
I think the sixth grade really and keep in mind, this grouping is 3 to 8th, everyone averaged in together. And it's really where we see the bigger dip in actual performance scores really becomes sixth grade.
and what are we doing to support those children? If sixth graders seem to be struggling, is there some remediation that we're
Yeah, I think, we've looked at data. We've unpacked the test during professional development days with teachers, gone through, looked at where the students are struggling and how we address those struggles in the curriculum. One of the things that, and again, in my humble opinion as someone who's new to Braintree, one of the things that I'm looking at that I feel needs to kind of be beefed up in particularly grades 4 through 8 is word study, is a vocabulary, is foundational skills, etymology for students to be able to look at words and be able to understand the meaning of words and the context in which they're used. And so that's one of the things that we've started to kind of look into. How do we provide that to students in a way that is helpful to them? There's work to be done. I think our data, of course, is really key to its first step.
any questions or comments? Mustafi?
So I looked at the DESE website and I compared 2019 through 2023. And in every single grade, every single subject, the percent of not meeting expectations rose between 2019 and 2023. And it was most notable at the middle school level. Grade 6 ELA went from 6% to 17% not meeting expectations, 6% to 15%, grade 8% to 16%. And math and science were impacted as well, but it really is striking that you have that percentage of students not meeting expectations at the middle school level. So when I look at your data comparing 2022 to 2023, we're still seeing pretty high rates of students not meeting expectations. So is there a plan to visit curriculum or what strategies besides the extra tutoring are you looking at?
Again, I think that it's important for the teachers to be able to understand where the students are lacking. That's step one, right? And then from there to be able to add to those areas that are areas of need.
So I would say that, again, we see that middle school cuts during the pandemic. We saw a loss of in the ELA connections class was just a support class for students struggling in ELA. We saw the elimination of 7th grade reading workshop. We saw the elimination of the remedial reading teachers. To me, that's very clearly is the result of those cuts. So I am very concerned about what's happening with our middle school students. And I hope that we're developing a very aggressive plan to get our students back on track.
I think that has been the case since the pandemic began. I think, as was mentioned earlier, the trends that you're seeing, particularly in grade 6, is a statewide issue. In terms of Braintree, we also have a compounding factor that last year, half of our fifth graders were in an elementary school and half of our fifth graders were in a middle school setting. And so there are adjustments to all of that as well. One of the things that we've discussed at length in terms of the overall performance of students in the district has been, over the last couple of years, the vast majority of our students are really beginning to demonstrate significant growth in getting back to pre-pandemic levels. However, we do have a cohort of students who struggled during the pandemic, struggled returning from the pandemic, continue to struggle after the pandemic. And it is that targeted assistance towards that group that I think is what we need to focus ourselves on. And when we look at the numbers that aren't doing what we'd like them to be doing, that's where they're residing right now. And we, as a district, need to work out ways to get those kids. Attendance has been a huge factor. Get them in school, get them the type of support within the school that they need, and make sure that we're accelerating their learning as quickly as we can, try to catch them back up to where they should be at this point in time.
And I just want to add that this year we did add a 6th grade literacy course to address this specific concern. So the 6th graders are getting a literacy course that was not in place before because of our identification that there was a dip. We needed to support those students as they were coming up through elementary and into the middle school years.
Thank you. Dr. Horak.
I brought some additional data to supplement what we're seeing. Would it be okay to share that, Mr. Lee? On flash drive?
Sure. You're gonna have to deal with my technology skills, though.
You load that up. So I applaud the teachers and staff, and thank you for coming and sharing this with us today. I want to make the case that the data presented here, while it's helpful to compare it to the state, I think that because of the purpose of the MCAS, we need to disaggregate the data and help us look at a couple of additional storylines that I think inform policy and budgeting, which is what we do as a school committee. So let's remind ourselves what MCAS, the purpose of MCAS. There's 3 big ones: improvement of teaching and learning, student and district accountability, and student accountability. I think the data definitely show that the number of students not meeting expectations in science is concerning. It sounds like math, we're doing okay. But I want to bring up a couple of points concerning ELA and elementary, because we know from the education research that proficiency in reading by the 3rd grade dictates future success. So if we're able to get it up, I'd like to take a look at some of this data disaggregated by schools for elementary level, because I think that's really important for informing policy and budgeting and what we do in the school district. So, and also I'm going to take the data back to 2019 as a benchmark of pre-pandemic. So here, my headline here is that elementary ELA scores still haven't recovered to 2019 levels. So I take MCAS on the left-hand side from 2019, 2021, 2022, and 2023, and I disaggregate the data based on the 6 elementary schools. And on the y-axis is the percentage of students meeting or exceeding expectations. So I took those 2 data points and added them together, and then graphed it for ELA on the left and math on the right. And I agree with Ms. Miller that math does seem like it's recovering from pre-pandemic, right? Like we see an upward trend in math. But I think that the more concerning thing is it's really important to look at the disaggregated data and see that we really aren't at those pre-pandemic levels in any of the schools for ELA, right? And so I took 4th grade, and because I know I just said that the proficiency of 3rd grade dictates future success, but this is the first time they've ever taken a test before in 3rd grade. So I thought, let's look at 4th grade. So that's why I present 4th grade data. So this is very concerning to me, and this should really inform our policy and budgeting decision-making for the future. Okay. Does our next speaker, what are you going to speak on?
SAT and AP scores.
Okay, so I'd like to take this opportunity to talk about equity because one student group that's really important to take care of is students with disabilities, and we haven't brought this up yet.
And so by equity, I mean that equitable teaching is when these demographic variables do not predict success or failure. And it's really important that we take care of our most vulnerable students with disabilities. So here, I'm going to call for more equity in elementary school students because I disaggregated the data for students with disabilities. And on the y-axis here is the average scaled score broken up by three representative elementary schools, Flaherty, Morris, and Hollis. And you can see the score categories on the bottom. So we're really looking at a score of 500 as meeting the expectation. So if they're above the thick purple line, we can say that the average score for the students with disabilities in a single school is meeting or exceeding the expectations, right? And we can see from both the third grade ELA and the third grade math that none of our students, the average score for the students with disabilities at these three elementary schools are not meeting or exceeding expectations. And this is troublesome. Like, I really think that we need to look at this and think about this when guiding our budgeting and policy and providing more equity to these students with disabilities. Okay, so for the next slide, I did the same thing with fourth grade, and we see a very similar trend. The average score for the ELA and the math for fourth grade against four different elementary schools is not near meeting expectations. So that's my point. Let's talk a little bit more about disaggregating the data to try to help us make these important decisions for these most vulnerable students. I'll take a point that I know that I don't have fifth and sixth grade here, but for fifth grade in 2023, and all across all fifth grade in our district, 9% of students with a disability, only 9% met or exceeded the expectations, as compared to 70% of this non-disabled students that met or exceeded. That's a huge gap. That's huge, right? We have to do something. It's 61 percentage points between disabled students and non-disabled students. In sixth grade, across all the students in district, in 2023, 6% of students that had a disability met or exceeded the expectations for ELA. 6%. In sixth grade, for students that don't have a disability, it's 49%. Okay, so we really got to take a look at these opportunity gaps between groups of vulnerable students and what are we doing to help those vulnerable students provide equity so that they can also succeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just add in, I completely agree with you, and we've done some of that, started some of that work within the leadership team. But I do want to just note that within the word disability are very different forms of disability. And so comparing two schools with different programs is comparing apples and oranges, because there may be a program that is very different in terms of intellectual ability or performance on a standardized assessment. And so that's a hard comparison when you're looking at data, just so that people are aware.
Okay. Are there any other questions or comments about ELA?
Did I understand correctly that most of the 10th grade students had passed the ELA MCAS too? Is that
No, on the retest, the MCAS 10th graders takes place March, without the calendar in front of me, 19th, 20th, 21st. It's two days of testing. Do you have the days off the top of your head?
No, but that's about right.
It's right in that ballpark, right?
So
there's a retest for students who don't make the test. There's a November retest and there's a March retest each year.
Historically, almost none of our students fail the MCAS in terms of graduation requirement. There are a few, they tend to be, especially the students who are significantly involved, and late transfers don't get the test done in time. But overall, we graduate all our kids based on the MCAS.
Any other questions or comments? Man, Joyce.
Thank you. I guess to the point of looking at trending data prior to the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic, is it typical that you would present to the committee the prior year, or do you, I'm assuming you look at the trending within your departments and whatnot, but I guess the presentation to the public, it is a curiosity to sort of see the data presented pre-pandemic to now. So I guess, is this the typical way that this data is presented? And or would it be beneficial to sort of kind of track the progress, including some pre-pandemic years.
Yeah.
So typically, we present it this way, if a pandemic never occurred.
Right.
A pandemic occurred. So when we want to look at where do we think we should be, we have to go back before the pandemic. So everybody keeps bringing up 2019. What we should not lose track of it, though, is since 2019, what has happened and what happens on an annual basis? What progress, if any, did we make last year? Are we on the right path to get the improvement we want? When every single trend that we're discussing here this evening is a statewide trend. We sit on the commissioners' calls. All this data, in essence, looks the same. There's some questions that arise from that. Why? Why do we see better progress in certain areas and almost no progress in other areas? Why is ELA across the state stagnant, but math is making a better improvement? And when Dr. Gennaro talks about the data, it is us examining where are they falling down? Where are they not making the progress that we'd anticipate that they'd be making? The special education point has been true for the last 20 years, and we do need to continue to do work on that and address those issues. The data was incomplete in terms of, I would put up all the elementary schools, not just a select few, to see what the special education numbers look like across the board. But the point is well taken. And, we all year long have been looking at certain subgroups to try to determine what are we not providing them that they need in order to be successful. And for a number of reasons, we wouldn't do that type of data analysis in a public meeting, but we do it internally so that we can modify instruction and make adjustments as necessary. We have, teams within each school that are looking at individual students and groups of students all the time to try to figure out what do they need that we have not given them yet, and we'll continue that work. It's been a slow grind for everybody since the pandemic. You've heard some of the supports are there other supports we could implement? Of course, but everything comes with a cost, and we need to figure out the most efficacious way to use the resources that we have.
The analysis that we presented last year included pre-pandemic, but since we had this year's data compares to a complete school year, we decided to show you that as this is the first 2 complete school years we've had since the pandemic. But it doesn't account for those 3 years in between that there was a lot of disjointed learning.
I was just going to add that when you presented in the fall, you did do the comparison of 2019 through, but now again, that we have the 2 years to compare. It's a difference.
Yeah, because at some point, you have to move past the fact that it happened, and we need to focus on where we are today. There's so many things that, talk as we get into conversations later about budget. What were the priorities in 2019 are no longer the priorities today. Things change, and we need to adjust to what is in front of us, always keeping in mind what is behind us, but focusing on the future.
Understood. Thank you. Ms. Tuffy.
Just out of curiosity, how does how did the state do on the NAEP, the 4th and 8th grade national,
We almost always are first.
Yeah.
pardon me?
We're almost every year we're first.
Yes, but did we remain first? We have all, Massachusetts always scored really high compared to the, I just wondered, there's been a lot of press lately about reading programs and Massachusetts has not changed as much as some other states. And I wondered if it showed in the NAEP.
And my understanding is that we are still number 1 in NAEP. And as I mentioned at a previous meeting, people talk about the Alabama Miracle or Mississippi, I forget which one it was. That just simply brought them up to the same conversation everybody else was already in.
Yes.
That growth that they had didn't even make up for how far behind we were. We continue to be on the forefront. The literacy and the reading wars that you can read about in the paper almost on a daily basis. The Globe had an extensive series on it. I found the reporting to be subpar. We use elements of Lucy Calkins in the unit of study. Well, in New York, it was not an approved curriculum, yet every single school that used it outperformed all the other schools in New York. So what are we looking for? Are we looking for validation that, we've got the right program because the state told us so, or do we want our students to be better readers? And we're focused on being better readers.
So we did Massachusetts tied for first place on grade 4 and grade 8 in 2022.
So I think that because the NAEP is a national test that's kind of randomly assigned to different schools, private and public. That, you know, I think that data is important to look at.
Okay. Oh,
Can I ask,
yeah, Joyce.
what the acronym stands for that you were just mentioning?
National Assessment of Educational Progress.
Thank you. So many acronyms.
It's right here. I'm reading it off the screen. Just know that.
Are there any other questions for ELA? No? Thank you very much. Mr. Ruffalo.
So we're gonna shift gears and talk about SAT, ACT, and AP scores. So, and obviously SAT scores and so forth. Now we're talking about 11th to 12th grade, AP 9th through 12th grade. So we are talking strictly at the high school. Obviously, you've probably seen in the news, there's, you know, I don't want to say a decrease in relevance, but the SAT is starting to lose a little of its relevance. There's less SAT and ACT test takers nationally since 2020. Actually, this year was a pretty big decrease in the scores, especially on the SAT. Continuation, if you keep up with the news, as I'm sure you do, most colleges are remaining test optional, some test blind, but that's not as prevalent. Test optional, and that includes all your Ivy League schools. If you look in the Northeast, the two schools that come to mind, Georgetown, but in the Northeast, MIT. Almost everybody else is still test optional, and they've committed to doing so for at least the next two graduating classes, if not beyond that. So when we talk about test optional, that's why when we get to the next slide, you'll see that there is a decrease in participation on the SAT, which there should be. If you don't mind going back one more, Mr. Lee, just so I can finish up, that's okay. And a couple of years ago, things like the SAT essay were eliminated, subject tests have been eliminated, and in March will be the first time the SAT is exclusively going to be administered digitally. So they're changing again. Over the course of the last 20 years, the exam has changed every 6 to 7 years. We kept using the term new SAT, and the new SAT became the old SAT. So I'm going to use the word new, but it is going to be new again because they keep changing it. They're shortening it, trying to make it more relevant. But the key is that it's being digital. So this is a 5-year data. So we were talking about some trends. And so you can see 2019, which was the last of the year that maybe is the benchmark that you're trying to compare to. 2020 is almost the same. 2021 shaded a little differently is the anomaly. If you look at the 5-year data we have, and Dr. Gennaro already mentioned this, our SAT scores in evidence-based reading and writing and math are excellent. The national average, we've always been well above. We're above the state average. You can see the scores in red, which is 2023. 4 of these 5 years, with the exception of 2021, we're above the Massachusetts average in both categories. In 2021, I could sit here and make an excuse as to why we were slightly below it. I will say this, the participation rate goes is a big factor into what your scores are going to be. So I think I said last year when we presented this, if you look at 88% of our students took the SAT of the graduating class, that is 85% in 2020. We were always in that 85 to 87% range. Those days are probably gone forever. And part of it, going back to the previous slide, with SATs being schools being test optional, they're still relevant and important for a number of students, but maybe not all students. So now this year, it dipped from 79% to 71%. I'm a little surprised that it went down as much as 71, but we were thinking it was going to be in the mid-70s. And that might even decrease a little lower. The 2021, where I said that's the hybrid year for everybody, 65% participation rate was pretty high if you compare to nationally and you compare to the state. So when our scores took a dip, you have to keep in mind, the more kids you test, if another school tests less students, chances are the students that don't test were me, the ones who are going to get lower scores, which will bring your average, it'll keep your average higher if they don't test. 65% that year was a pretty good score, pretty good percentage, which is why maybe our scores took a dip. But if you look at now the last 2 years, again, back above the average and above where 2019 and 2020 were in both of those categories. This latest iteration of the SAT started in 2017. And since then, proportionally, our scores in the two categories were much higher above the national norms than the previous SAT, if you will. So again, the participation rate is probably going to stay around there. Massachusetts was 57%, we're at 71, so it's still higher. ACT, American College Testing, you're probably not as familiar with it. Years and years ago, it was prevalent mostly in the Midwest and Western part of the country. 10, 12 years ago, we started making more of a push for our students to take it as an alternate. Why? Because if they didn't score as well in the SAT, ACT scores might be the key into getting into a college. 5, 6 years ago, before the pandemic, we actually got up to about a third of our graduating class was taking the ACT. Part of it is because it was part of our initiative to push that. In good conscience, once the pandemic happened and everything else going on, never mind academically, kids' mental health, the last thing we wanted them to do was sitting in test center sites for another 4.5 and 5 hours on a Saturday morning, especially when all the schools are test optional anyway. So we've started pushing less. So you see no data here. And part of it is because in the last 3 years, we had less than 20 of our students take the ACT. And again, they followed our advice. So if you want them to take more, we'd have to offer different advice. We don't think we should. So with 20 or less students, the data is not relevant to show it here. So we're going to kind of skip over the ACT. So advanced placement, which is not going anywhere. Okay. Grades 9, 10, 11, and 12. The majority of the numbers you'll see are our 11th and 12th graders, although over the years now, a lot more of our sophomores and some freshmen, but sophomores is a big area where in the last 5 years, we've increased the participation. Advanced placement scores, college level type courses, scored on a 1 through 5, 5 being the highest. Kids who get minimum of 3, but it's really up to each college what scores they'll accept in and what subject areas. So there used to be a day where people used to say, well, if you get a 3 or above, you get college credit. You get 3 or above, you have the chance to get college credit, depending on where you go, what you're majoring in, and so forth. And again, they're set by the quality. If you go to state schools around here, they'll pretty much take everything 3, 4, 5 and above. A school like Boston University might say we need 4 and above, and we're not going to take it in a course that's important to the major that you're taking. You just have to take that course again. So that's how the exams are scored. So again, 5-year data. Now, and again, 2019, 2021, a slight anomaly. If you look at the percent of students that achieved at least a 3 plus, that's the 4th row. That's at least on one exam. And then you have percent of exams, that's the total in number of exams, 3 or above. It has our percentages with the US national average. You can see the US average is always around that 60% mark. This current year, and I apologize, it's not on the slide, but it is exactly 60%. We're at 84, 82. Again, you can see 2020, 21, the hybrid year. The national score went down to 55. Ours went down to 77. But we're generally in that 84, 83. This past year, 83.8%. Now, the thing we want to talk about with this slide, and this goes back 5 years, is our participation. And when you talk about access for all students, there's no better indicator than this. If I went back to 2017, so we look at the number of students, and we're up to this past year, 383, which is an all-time high for us. Number of exams, 760, just barely below 2021, which is an all-time high. If we move back to 2017, the number of students taking at least one AP exam was 300. You go back 10 years to 2014, it was 230. There's 380 kids. And what does that tell you? And when I say we, it's my fellow colleagues, our former principal, Mr. Lee, because under his tenure, we talked a lot about pushing kids to take a more advanced class at least once when they're in high school. And that's something that we're trying to, we're pushing at the middle school level. So when they get to the high school level, next year, don't hold me to this number, but number of students who are taking an exam next year is in the 420s. So it jumped even higher than what we thought. And that's representative of the fact that, years ago, you probably heard the words, kids were tracked, right? And if you didn't start in a track, you weren't getting into that track. That changed a number of years ago, whether that be 20 years ago, 15 years ago, but Rome wasn't built in a day. It takes time to build that up. We have plenty of students who didn't walk into the high school at the advanced honors level who are representative here because they worked their ways up. We have plenty of students who are on IEPs or 504s. 20 years ago, when I used to do an AP test, 0 of those students were in the room. Now, I'm not saying we're there yet, but there are plenty of those students who are represented in these numbers. And what does that mean? The percent of threes is probably going to come down a little. We were maybe in the 87, 88%, 90% is like the holy grail, if you could get there. We're still at 84, 85% of students, with a 3. This year, 88, and the total score is 83.8. That's only a slight dip, but the positive being that many more students are taking exams. So that's been a huge impetus over the last 10 years, and the numbers lay that out. And so we're willing to say, we're okay with a student taking a one class. And maybe their score is not a 4 or 5, but because that student can now go into college and have been exposed to higher level material, we'll take the hit on the score because that's better for the student in the long run. So, and again, this is the departments together. This is the initiative and how we've grown it. So the last 2 slides is just all of our AP exam scores. Subject areas, 5 years again. I'll focus on the last category, and I'm not going to read all these to you. These are our 19. We actually offer 20. This current year, it's going to be 21 different AP offerings. We're offering music this year for the first time in about 10 years. So kudos to the music department. So that'll be represented. If you look at the national averages, the far 2 columns, blue is Braintree. I know it's kind of small, but I know you have this somewhere. And the national average, we're above the national average, and in many cases, well above the national average in 17 of the 19 subjects that you see here. And one of the ones that we're not, I must say, was the French exam, which is, if you remember, when we got hacked last year, we had to totally shut down the network, and it happened right in the middle of the French exam. So these poor kids had to come back during senior week, a week and a half later, and retest, and they almost got to the national average. So we're going to give them a little pass on that. We couldn't, unforeseen circumstances. But in some of them, Dr. Gennaro mentioned English lit, English lang, we are far above national averages. Something like calculus AB, environmental science, human geography, just to pick one in each kind of subject area, we're well above the national average. And when you look at one of those subjects, like a human geography, we tested 74 kids. So it's not like we just said 20 kids in the class are taking it, and that's why our averages are so high. 74 kids, and a lot of them are those sophomores that I was telling you about that 5-7 years ago would never have taken an AP class. So, departmentally, we've done well in almost all these subject areas, and we keep increasing the enrollment. So
It's really a credit to the teachers as well. See those averages.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and going back to, 20 years ago, there was a, sink or swim mentality, and there is more of a, more to be able to work with the kid and let them try to fight through the course and see if they can hang in there and for the benefits. And absolutely the teachers do that much more now than, back in our day.
Right. And it's interesting to see because 10 years ago, SATs were all SATs and ACTs were less popular, and now ACTs are pretty much out, and it's another new SAT because, as you said, there's several new SATs. You don't get to fill in the circle anymore; you have to do it digitally.
That's going to be the first time. So they took the PSAT digitally this past October for the first time. They started piloting it internationally, so they do have some data on how it worked and so forth. So now it's a collaborative effort with the technology department when we have to, just like MCAS. So it's the same thing, but to be honest, the interface is so similar to MCAS that, we had a couple of kids practice on it ahead of time. They're so much smarter than we are with these things.
Technology, yes.
And I think in some ways they're more comfortable. So SATs is going to be exclusive digitally starting next month. So yeah, no more filling the bubbles.
Any questions or comments from the committee on
Madam Chair.
Ms. Tuffy?
So, thank you very much, Lisa. I'd love to see these scores. They're really great. And they're to not just the teachers, but the students, hard work on those tests. So it sounds like you read the same article in the New York Times as I did on January 8th that talked about the SATs, how some schools are bringing them back, like MIT and Georgetown, based on some research from Brown and Dartmouth. they point out that the standardized tests are actually less biased than many other parts of the college application process. We've always had, just like with MCAS, socioeconomic concerns, demographic data sort of drive. You get your Dovers who have high scores, and those parents can afford to send their kids to different sports things and do all sorts of extracurricular activities that help with their essays. But there are, and I know I've certainly seen them in my career as a teacher, and I'm sure you have as well. There are some economically disadvantaged children who score really well on the SATs. And when you are just comparing grades, there's a lot of variety from school to school. So MIT went back to using those SATs and requiring them. And in fact, they reported that they have their most diverse class ever this year. So I wonder if you're saying that you think that colleges are going to stick with no SATs or SAT optional for the next couple of years? Do you think?
A lot of them have committed to it for at least the next 2 cycles. I'm not saying that that's going to be forever. What I would say is, even if X amount of schools go back to it, we're still going to probably have 5 years from now more test optional schools than we did before 2020. But yeah, that's not to say that other schools aren't going to follow, Georgetown, MIT, and say we still see the relevance, and it's another factor among other factors that we're going to use. And I think some of them are going to wait to see what the latest iteration of the SAT, what results it gives them before they decide that as well.
So would you encourage those students that are economically disadvantaged to take the SATs when they're as to make them sort of stand out?
So the recommendation we give now is we recommend not even different categories of students, all students, like under the heading of you really have nothing to lose mentality,
Right.
But you may have something to gain. We encourage all students to take the SAT at least once, and then we'll help you evaluate whether you take it again, whether you should use the scores. The exception to that is, there are some kids who took the PSATs and had a terrible experience, and now they know they're only applying to test optional schools. Why go through the stress? So that's why that 88% number of participation is going to definitely come down, but we're not going down to 40 or 50% because we are still encouraging students to try it. But for some of the reasons you said, if it helps you stand out, and look, there are some students, how do I describe them? Let's say some very intelligent students who lacked focus or motivation for a certain time. And all of a sudden, they show some results that can make a college say, wow, there's a lot more promise here than met the eye. That kid, the SATs can help them. So yeah, for different kids, but we're encouraging them all to give it a shot with those few exceptions for that reason.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? I also wanted to mention too that the Hollis Fund is still paying for the AP exams. So students are not required to pay for their AP exams. So through the town, through the Hollis Fund, they pay for those exams. Do you have any idea what they're up to now? Over $100 an exam?
It's in the 90s. You get a $9 rebate. So this year you end up, it's $97, but then the district gets like a $9 rebate. But if the kids were paying, it would be $97 per exam.
So if you had a child potentially taking 4 or 5, or we have some kids that are overachievers and take 7 or 8, that's a significant savings for the families. Yes.
It's
And again, if a college accepts 3 or above, they get college credit, and it's a class they don't have to take when they get to college. So again, saves tuition. So just want to mention that because that's great.
Oh yeah, I spoke to a graduate who, former graduate who graduated a year early for that very reason.
My daughter graduated 6 months early.
Right, exactly.
So thank you very much, Braintree Public Schools. Okay. All right. Any other questions before we move on and let these nice people go home for the evening? No other questions. So thank you all very much for being here. We appreciate
Thank
the
you.
reports.
Thanks, guys.
Back to you, Mr. Lee.
So back to the committee, this is the consideration of the second reading for approval of the 2024-2025 Braintree High School Program of Studies. Dr. Scully was here at last meeting to walk you through the proposed changes. You can see them highlighted up on the screen. But this evening we'll be looking for a vote of approval.
Are there any questions or comments from anyone on the committee? No? Everybody's comfortable? Okay, so I have a motion to accept the proposed BHS Program of Studies changes.
Motion to accept.
I have a motion by Dr. Horak,
Second.
second by Ms. Tuffy. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That is unanimous. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
We got an update.
So we have two administrative updates this evening. The first is the kindergarten update. As I walked you through the numbers last year, they've obviously changed since our last meeting. So as of today, we have 270 students registered for full-day kindergarten, 19 for half-day kindergarten, 189. Last year at this very time, we had 280 students registered for full-day kindergarten and 22 registered for half-day kindergarten, for a total of 302. So we're on pace. We're off a couple numbers, but not, I don't think we stepped outside one standard deviation. So we're on track. But happy to answer any questions. They keep coming in. Payment plans are being implemented where necessary, and money is coming in for the tuition.
Any other questions about kindergarten or comments?
Through the chair.
Dr. Horak?
How is the progress for the early learning center coming?
The last meeting that we had with facilities, they're on track. The abatement is done on the second floor. It's almost done on the first floor. We've gone through the facility with both kindergarten staff and preschool staff. We have arranged spaces. We're already making plans for the equipment that has to go into some of the preschool spaces. And that will be the next step the facilities will take on. So at this point, I don't see opening on time.
Thank you.
Ms.
I have a
Tuffy?
question as well. Are you, is it going to be a art room and a music room for each or just one for the whole school?
There's dedicated art rooms. Music will be done in the auditorium. But almost all specials, with the possible exception of ELL, I believe, have their own space. And that was part of the design that was made. ELL will be based on our needs as we identify what the student population exactly looks like when we go in.
So I have a little concern about music being done in the auditorium. In the past, they had music classes on stage, which would not be good for, I think, young children. If that was a safety concern. Is there space for a separate music?
There could be. The plan was designed with, again, members of the kindergarten staff and members of the preschool staff. Obviously, we would take safety precautions where we could use the stage for music. We have stages in most of the elementary schools that are utilized by our students. But if another space were needed, there are other spaces we could utilize.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments about kindergarten? Okay, we were a miss. Yes, we were a miss. I have it on my notes.
Mine too.
Not in our agenda. We apologize to the student representatives. You're not on the agenda, but by all means, please go ahead with your report.
On behalf of Maddie, I'd like to give her update first since she couldn't be here. She was just going to talk about student council fundraisers and how all of the classes across the board have been raising a lot of money for prom and various other initiatives, which is a good trend. Bella didn't have any updates, but she just says hello to everyone. So hello on behalf of Bella. And then I would also like to recognize again, Miss Hurley. I've had her both as a golf coach and as a director for the National Art Honor Society. And she's just such a warm face to see and an amazing person. And I've personally learned so much from her. So I want to thank her on behalf of the girls golf team and NAHS. And then I'd also like to recognize Mr. Mahar, who is a custodian at Braintree High, because today Anika we're in the same Spanish class. He came in and he fixed the heater in our AP Spanish class, and it was such a breath of fresh air to come into a warm classroom in BHS, because recently a lot of students have been complaining about it being very cold in the building. I personally have on multiple occasions worn ski thermals under my clothes to school because it's just way too cold, to the point where when my mom asked me what I wanted for Christmas, I said ski thermals to wear to school. So it's definitely been something a lot of students are concerned about. It's freezing in there. So it was an interesting contrast to see in that Spanish classroom today, which is something that students want to raise awareness about to the committee today. And then one last comment about the English scores and tutoring programs. The National Honor Society runs a tutoring program for any students in the school struggling in any subjects. And as a student who's taken both AP Lang and AP Lit, I tutor English students. And the point brought up by the director of English earlier about etymology and word association earlier really struck a chord with me, because that's something that I've seen as a trend in the peers that I help tutor. But a good thing about that is, as we move into AP Lang junior year and AP Lit senior year, as you can see by the AP scores, there's a really great improvement there. So the 10th grade English teachers are doing some amazing work with students, because it's definitely a jump in our experience from 9th to 10th grade English. And that might be where some of the struggle is, with just vocab quizzes and reading. And I think Shakespeare and kind of dissecting words does help us a lot. So just kudos to 10th grade English teachers, and of course the AP English teachers as well, that really help us get to where we need to be.
Thank you.
So I think this week, a lot of students are thinking about midterms because that's coming up. So that's been a stress in everyone's mind, but I think the teachers are spending a lot of time preparing us, and a lot of students feel ready to take them. I think we practice a lot throughout the year, especially in the AP courses leading up to the midterms. So we're well prepared, well equipped. Now it's just going in and kind of taking the test. And then for the clubs that I'm involved in, currently the Asian Student Association is still planning for the Lunar New Year Festival. This past Friday, we had a meeting where we had our students come in and make posters for the event. So we have different tables. Our club in specific is giving each of our board members has a table where we're doing some activity in arts and crafts. So we set up making posters for that. And then for the Diversity Council, so Diversity Council kind of shifted to the Bridges program. So we call ourselves the Bridges now, and we're trying to get more students to go in and educate their peers. So we've been going into English classes and presenting a script, because the Diversity Council, since we kind of shifted to Bridges, we've been working with the Anti-Defamation League, and they have a little course, and it's called the Peer Leadership Program. So students have been trained by them on how to give these presentations. So this past term, we had a bunch of students go into the classroom, specifically English classes, and it's just a one-day thing in the term where you go and we present our scripts. So we work on the scripts together as a club, and then we go present them. And I think the next step is to go in during one of the professional development days and work with the staff members and kind of present what we've been doing with the students, but now in a setting where we have the staff members with us. This past month, also 8 of our students went to South Middle School and presented to the staff members over there. And we each gave an example of what is something we've been working on and what aspect of diversity, equity, or inclusion that we would like to see. So we gave our first example. Some of my friends talked about having a learning disability or an IEP and how that's affected them in their learning time, and how teachers could better prepare those students or make them feel more included. We had some students talk about their time with, having religious holidays and cultural affiliations, and how that could impact your education, and how teachers could better equip students to feel more accepted, specifically for religious holidays, and how on those days where students may need extra time to complete assignments, what a teacher can do. So we're really trying to get in to now work with the staff members. Ms. Gonzalez is our advisor, Ms. Thomas from South Middle School. They've been really helping us out, and we feel ready to go present to a room of staff members. So that's kind of the next thing for our program.
Will you present East as well?
Yeah, so we're planning, so we went to South, and now the plan is to work with East too. We have more, since Miss Thomas works, she teaches at South, it's either connection in, but I think East is our next goal. After we work a little more with South, we want to shift to try to get to both schools as well, so.
Great, thank you both. Any comments or questions for our reps?
Can I ask a question through the chair?
Dr.
You indicated that it's been very cold in Braintree High School. Is every classroom, and I'll give Mr. Lee an opportunity to comment whether we're meeting the students' needs and is it a building maintenance issue or what's going on?
So, and it really depends on the day. Honestly, it's a strange situation. You'll walk into one class one day, freezing cold, the next day, way too hot. So as students, we walk into classes and are very confused. We're not very well versed on the infrastructure of the school, but we just sort of feel the effects of it. A lot of students carry outdoor coats with them and they keep them on during the entire class because it's too cold. I don't know the specific problem with the heater today in our Spanish class, but it was very warm in there. And you could just tell students were a lot more comfortable. I think it's mainly on, what would you say, the third floor? The third floor tends to be the coldest, I would say. As well as the girls' gymnastics room that does not have heating, and it is a winter sport. Maddie is on the gymnastics team. If she were here, she would definitely speak on that. They go in there, no shoes, no socks, leotards, they're freezing. So if that's something the school would like to address, I think that would be amazing for our athletes.
Want to comment?
I can respond to the extent that I too am not an expert in the infrastructure of the maintenance issues at the high school. The heat obviously works. It's the circulation of the heat that can be problematic. Each room has a univent in it. The univent is what Mr. Mahar, who's been there since the building actually opened, went in there and fixed today. So each one of those univents have to work properly. Depending upon where you are in the building, you gave the example of the gymnastics room. There is no heat in that room. It's ambient heat from the other surrounding areas that is supposed to feed into that space. So that would be a different project entirely to fix that particular one. So it is an aged building. So again, it's not the generation of heat. We generate heat. There are some rooms that Samantha pointed out, we have complaints that it's too hot in there. And we have other rooms that it's too cold in there. And people like Mr. Mahar and facilities run around trying to rebalance it all. And it's a chase, and the work continues. And obviously this week was remarkably cold.
Those to our staff for helping maintain an aging building.
Absolutely, and in the town's facilities department, who have been entirely responsive since they've come on board and worked really hard to keep it all running.
Thank you. From the school committee, the subcommittees. So the reorganization of the subcommittees was communicated earlier in the day. I got everybody's requests. I wasn't able to fill everybody's requests exactly due to several requests for some committees. So this has been circulated. I'm not going to read it through unless somebody wants me to. But it will be posted on the school website as far as the assignments for the subcommittees from every school committee member. Every school committee member is on at least 3 subcommittees, if not more. So again, I want to thank you all for letting me know what you're interested in. And again, I hope that your assignments are satisfactory. With that, we have come to the end of our meeting. Our next meeting will be on Monday, February 5th at 6:30 right here in the Colbert Conference Room. At this point, we are going to be going into an executive session. We will not be returning after executive session to open meeting. So executive session, consideration to enter into executive session pursuant to Chapter 30A, Section 21A1 to address personnel issue as an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the legal position of the school committee as declared by myself, the chair. So for this, I need a roll call vote to go into executive session. Mr. Fogarty.
Aye.
Mr. Rolo.
Aye.
Mayor Joyce.
Aye.
Dr. Horak. Ms.
Aye.
Duffy. And the chair votes aye. At this point, we will adjourn the open meeting. So again, I need a motion and a second. Close.
Motion to close.
Second.
And a second by Ms. Duffy. Again, roll call vote.